Since we may not have school tomorrow, I wanted to go ahead and review for the assessment that we will still have on Tuesday. The chapter itself on World War II is going to be, we broke this down into three specific areas. We looked at the home front, we looked at the war in Europe, and we looked at the war in the Pacific. And we approached these through different things. So as I go through this, just an overview, you're going to want to go ahead and review your notes, review the things that we did in class, review the things that were assigned on Classroom. We actually started with the war in Europe, but we spent a lot of time on the war on the home front. Two things to really focus on as you're reviewing or thinking about this particular section is to, one, think about the mobilization that we did, that we looked at. The mobilization for war, the building of tanks, planes, and things like that. The rationing, the investments, the things that the people themselves had to sacrifice. But we also looked a lot at the impact of the war at home. We looked at the impact of the war on the Japanese immigrants and the Japanese Americans. We looked at the impact on African Americans. We looked at the impact on women. And so it's important to make sure that you think about those things as you are reviewing. We then went ahead, here are some key terms. Again, we looked at the internment, Executive Order 9066. We looked at the lawsuit against that Korematsu. Kaiser built a Liberty ships, Rosie the Riveter, gave women, represents the opportunities that women had. We also see lots of other things here that we reviewed. If you go ahead and then, review all the stuff, remember that we looked at a lot of this using imagery. We looked at the images and the posters that were created by the government to encourage people to make those sacrifices that were necessary. When we talked about the war in Europe, really we're looking at the strategies for the success and defeating the Germans in Europe. I also mentioned a couple of conferences that took place that addressed the strategies. The key terms here, there are some generals that we want to look at here. Marshall, Eisenhower, and Patton were three American generals here. Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. We have Operation Overlord here, which is the preparation for D-Day. We have three conferences that talked about different strategies, Battle of the Bulge, and then at the end of the war, we have the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunals. Touched upon a little about that when we talked about the Holocaust. This was where the Nuremberg War Crimes trials were where the Germans responsible for those atrocities were tried and held accountable. We then looked at the war in the Pacific, and again, basically the objective is to explain the strategy in defeating Japan in the Pacific, and mostly this has to do with island hopping. We're going to talk more about the dropping of the atomic bombs, so I haven't really spoken of the Manhattan Project much, or much about the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, except when we were talking about it in class when we were building those timelines. As you look at the key terms, do remember things like the Doolittle Raid, obviously Pearl Harbor, some of the key battles in the island hopping campaign. Look for key turning points. Midway was a turning point. Okinawa was a turning point. We saw General MacArthur in the Philippines, Admiral Nimitz, one of the leading naval minds of the Pacific and the man in charge. So you want to keep that in mind as you are reviewing. Finally, here's just a quick list of the things that we used to learn about World War II. You did various readings in Chapter 21, and then we did a number of these things through Classroom. Chapter 21 is your main guide for this. Please make sure that you have read all of the materials so that you have a good understanding of everything that we covered. The test itself, or the assessment itself, will be a combination of multiple choice, matching, some short answer, describing things, explaining things. No huge essay, but please remember that every time that I ask you to explain something or describe something, I'm really trying to get you to include the specific detail about specific examples that you choose to include. And there, more likely than not, may be some images on there as well.